day 2 of the 32nd annual salute hosted by the Colorado Gerontological Society. I'm Mitch Jilniger, and I'll be guiding you through today's exciting events we have for you. Many of you have enjoyed the salute as a live event, so we're glad you're back here in this virtual space this year. If you're watching us on Facebook, I would encourage you to click on the link in the Facebook post description to register right here on Hop In. And you can log in with your Facebook account just with one click. It's really easy to do. And by joining us on the platform, you'll get the most out of today's event. You'll interact with our exhibitors, you can network with your fellow attendees, and we'll be entered in for a raffle at the end of the day. So for those of you who are back after yesterday's event, welcome back. We're glad you're here and joining us once again for day 2. Now, today's live event will be from 11 to 1 in the afternoon, that's Mountain Time, but that exhibitor space will remain accessible until 5 p.m. today, so you can enjoy it. You'll be able to browse the exhibitors at any time, again, up until 5 p.m. Mountain Time today. Now, we'll be having a special celebration at the end of the event with that prize raffle, so you want to make sure to stick around for the next couple hours to see if you are the lucky winner. Now, I want to point out how to navigate today's events and booths if you're new to this event. If you joined us yesterday, you're probably old pros. Just enjoy a little coffee or tea while I explain it to the others who are just joining us. For those of you that are new on Hop In, let me explain how to navigate. It's really easy. On that left-hand side of your screen, you're going to see 3 buttons. You'll see Reception, Stage, and Expo. Now, if you get lost throughout the day, all you do is click on Reception, and that's where you find all today's agenda right in front of you. The segment that is happening in the moment will be highlighted, and by clicking on the highlighted field, you'll be taken directly to that area of the event, so you don't miss anything. Most of the day, we will meet right here in what we call the stage, and here you'll enjoy those educational segments. We've got entertainment today, and you'll have me helping you guide through today's events. Now, in the expo section, we have a selection of exhibitor booths for you to visit, and I'll prompt you when you're going to have free time to explore without missing anything on this main stage. And we'll be able to kind of go there on your own at your own pace. You can click through individual booths. You can watch videos there, slideshows, and see what special salute offers they have. Some exhibitors are going to have a short video for you. And again, others have slides and pictures for you to enjoy. Don't forget to click that Send Me More Info button if you'd like to learn more about one of those exhibitors. All right, take a look at the right-hand side, and you'll see there's a chat box there. So use it. Feel free to network, ask questions, simply say hi to all of us. Now, I'm going to give you about 1 minute to play around with the platform or to write in the chat box, and we're going to meet right back here afterwards. So let us know where you're watching from and what you're most excited to see today. Welcome back. Our first presentation today is from John Henderson. He's the co-founder of Active Minds Denver. John will talk to us about the key accomplishments of the past, including the Transcontinental Railroad and the electric grid, and then fast forward to the 2020s and the challenge of maintaining these infrastructure projects in present day. So please welcome John Henderson to the stage for part 1 of Bridges to Broadband.
Well, good morning. My name is John Henderson. I am with Active Minds, and I'm delighted to be with you this morning as part of the Salute to Seniors in partnership with the Colorado Gerontological Society, with the focus, the theme being roaring into the 2020s. The presentation I'm doing today is coming in 2 parts. It's entitled From Roads to Bridges, but I would actually retitle it myself From Roads to Bridges and Beyond. My focus in the 2 parts that I'm going to be focusing upon today, from the 1920s to the 2020s, and that is the story of infrastructure and the role that it plays historically in the United States of America. So in this first section, I'm going to be focusing upon infrastructure in the 1920s. And then the second section, I'm going to focus on infrastructure right now in the 2020s and as we go further and forward into the decade in which we live right now. Now, in both of these presentations, I find in studying this issue of infrastructure in the United States, a few themes come to mind as they were back in the 1920s, but also now. The first theme is the way in which infrastructure investment happens both with regard to what I call legacy infrastructure projects, in other words, ones that are already in existence and in use, and then also infrastructure about new ideas, new inventions, and other potentialities. So that dynamic of maintaining the old, but also looking towards the new. The second theme that comes across, again, both in the past and now, and that is the dynamic and at times tense relationship between the private sector and its role in developing infrastructure and the public sector, whether that is on the public sector side of the equation, and that is public monies invested in infrastructure, or whether that's public oversight in the form of regulation of the development of infrastructure. Again, a dynamic tension there. The third theme that comes up again and again, both in the past and now, and that's the rural-urban divide and where investment is taking place, both privately and publicly, at the urban level and as well as the rural level. And then last but not least, my fourth theme, again, that I'll be returning to, and that's the role that international relations and affairs play. Now, those international relations can be conflict. War plays a very important role in infrastructure development. But it also is non-war, non-military roles, the story of international competition and the role that it plays in infrastructure. Now, as I go into the 1920s, so going back 100 years and thinking about infrastructure, what did infrastructure development look like in the 1920s? There are three different categories that I'd like to focus upon. The first one is where my title comes from. And then when we think about roads and bridges, we're talking about transportation. And transportation infrastructure has many different sectors, and I'm going to touch upon a number of them. The second area is the development of infrastructure for communication. Again, in the past and in the present. And then the third was a new idea 100 years ago, not so new right now, and that's the issue of electrification of the nation. Now, note that these things intermingle with one another and play upon. So you need electrification for communication, and sometimes transportation interplays with, and sometimes transportation is communication. So they're not completely separate from one another, but those three major areas are ones I'm going to focus upon: transportation, communication, and electrification. Now, I'm going to share along the way some slides that focus upon some of the different areas that I'll be touching upon, again, looking at those themes. Now, as I bring those slides forward, I begin with this one just to call out that, yes, I am with Active Minds. Our website there is at the bottom, activeminds.com. But we begin with the story of transportation. Now, 100 years ago, the story of transportation depicted on this map of the United States, and by the way, note there's no Alaska and there's no Hawaii at this point. All the same, we're looking at two major stories of transportation that was already in existence in the 1920s. Now, those two major stories don't indicate what was, as I mentioned before, the legacy transportation infrastructure of the 1920s. And that was canal systems. So this map doesn't emphasize the canal systems that were still a major part of the American story. The Erie Canal had been built well before that, but even as recently as 1919, the Erie Canal had been broadened and extended upon. So canals remained a core component of infrastructure in the United States back in the 1920s, and they were being maintained with public and private monies along the way. Now, the big ones that you see showing up here, first and foremost, and that's the story of railroads. Now, a key theme, as I mentioned before, and that is the role that international affairs plays in the development of infrastructure. Now, during World War I, which had just ended as we turn to the 1920s, the railroad systems had been nationalized in the name of public safety and in the name of greater efficiency. So we move into the 1920s, and a key component of the extension of the railroad system was to maintain the efficiencies that had been achieved by way of that nationalization. Another key component was the maintenance of systems that sometimes were in competition with one another and were inefficient. So the 20s was kind of a period of upheaval when it comes to maintaining and extending the railroad systems of the United States. The other thing that we see here, and that is that we're also talking about waterways and port systems. And we must remember that as we turn to the 1920s, that's also the point of the Panama Canal. Now, the Panama Canal had been completed in 1914, but it was officially rolled out in 1920. So canal systems, as well as international affairs, play a central role in what I'm calling the legacy transportation infrastructure of the 1920s. Now, there's also, though, new ideas and new things coming along. Now, it's hard to believe this, but indeed, the road systems were new in the 1920s. Route 66 was, in fact, created in the 1920s, specifically 1926. And so the automobile, which of course is a legacy story now, was fairly new and certainly being extended. The Model T had been introduced, the Model A was introduced in 1927, and with the greater number of automobiles, the extension of the American road system with Route 66 at the heart of it was very much a part of the 1920s. Now, also, though, we must remember that when we think about the story of that extension, we're also thinking about new inventions, and that, of course, is the airplane. What we see here is Denver Municipal Airport, which was opened in October of 1929. So later to become Stapleton Airport, later to be moved away. But my point is, in the 1920s, we see both legacy transportation, but also the establishment of new forms of transportation. Now, we must also remember that sometimes those newfangled systems of transportation don't necessarily pan out. Back in the 1920s, there was also an assumption that rigid dirigibles or blimps were going to be the cutting edge of long distance transportation. We're still in the 1930s was the Hindenburg disaster. But even as they were, for example, when they were finishing the Empire State Building in the 1920s, they built a dirigible connector for the Empire State Building on the assumption that blimps or dirigibles were going to be part of the core of transportation systems in the 1920s and beyond. So sometimes what we think is going to be the future doesn't pan out that way. And it's going to be interesting to see what happens as we move forward. Now, as well, when we think about the story of infrastructure in the 1920s, we are also thinking about the story of communication. Now, when we think about communication, the central element of communication in the 1920s was the acceleration of the shift from the legacy communication system, which was the telegraph, and now the rolling out increasingly of ever and ever more American homes with telephones. Now, central to this story in the 1920s was the establishment of the Bell system. The logo that we see here was introduced in 1924, and this brings in that theme of public-private tension and conflict. Remember that AT&T was originally the American telephone and telegraph company. Now, in order for it to get beyond federal oversight and trust busting, a concern that the Bell system was going to be overly monopolistic, the Bell system in the 1920s was forced to sell its stock and its ownership in Western Union in order to not be subject to further federal oversight. And as a result of that, thereafter, you have the creation of the Bell system that was an integrated monopoly for telephones, and that would extend well beyond the 1920s, right up until the 1980s. So with communication, the establishment of a privately held but publicly overseen telephone system was central to the 1920s. Additionally, the 1920s is also the point at which the radio becomes increasingly a part of the American story and the American home, as we see here. Again, that theme that I talked about with regard to safety and government oversight. Did you know that it was illegal to own, for a private citizen to own a radio in the United States until 1919? It was illegal because of World War I. It was not until the end of World War I and 1919, 1 year later, that it became legal for people to have radios in their own homes. And thereafter, things took off. Now, note that this is overwhelmingly a story of private enterprise, but it was not necessarily going to be that way. If you look at the history of radio in Great Britain, it was overseen, the BBC, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas the choice was made in the United States to have a little bit more of a laissez-faire approach to the extension of radios, and that would be the creation of major and important companies that were both selling radios to American homes, but also establishing that impetus to buy radios. Well, why would you want to spend the money on a radio? Because you could listen to your radio and get free shows. And thus, CBS was established, the Columbia Broadcasting System, established in 1927. NBC established as RCA in 1926, and ABC established as NBC Blue in 1927. Again, 1920s, big infrastructure growth significantly in the private sector. Now, last but not least, my last story is a very important one in the 1920s, and that is the story of electrification. Now, electricity, of course, was not invented in the 1920s, but this graph shows you how it extended in the 1920s. Note that the story of 35% of American homes were electrified at the turn of the 1920s. That was doubled to nearly 70% by 1930. But also note a key component here, and that is rural electrification would be a later story. The necessity of federal dollars for that would be a story of the 1930s. Nonetheless, the extension of and the creation of the American electrical grid, the core of that was something that was established in the 1930s, with both public and private stories playing a significant role. So collectively, when we think about infrastructure in the 1920s, we see innovation, we see public investment, but we also see significant private investment. We see the legacy and the role of American governmental systems, both with regard to federal oversight, but also the military, the story of the war. So the 1920s would be a boom indeed. The roaring 20s was a story of significant infrastructure investment. Now, in my next section, I'm going to turn to the 2020s, but we'll take a pause at this point.
Well, thank you, John, for your insightful discussion. Now we'd like to give you another opportunity to visit our resources fair. You have about 15 minutes right now until we meet back here on this main stage. As a reminder, all you need to do is click on that expo button that's on the left-hand side bar, and there you can scroll through that entire list, click on the ones that you're interested in, watch videos, live chat with exhibitors, visit websites, and you can click on that Send Me More Info button if you wish. Now, if you're watching us on Facebook, don't feel like you're missing out. Follow that link in the description and get logged onto our virtual conference platform. So please enjoy the fair, and we'll meet back here in about 15 minutes for part 2 of From Bridges to Broadband. Welcome back. Now I'd like to introduce John Henderson back to our stage here for part 2 of Bridges to Broadband, where he'll continue our discussion about the involvement of technology on today's critical infrastructure. So take it away, John.
Well, welcome back to Salute to Seniors. My name is, as I mentioned a moment ago, John Henderson. I'm with Active Minds, showed our logo before. We're delighted to be part of the Salute to Seniors program, roaring back into the 2020s being the theme. And with my focus and Active Minds focus this time upon infrastructure. Last time around, a few minutes ago, I was focusing on infrastructure of the past, the 1920s. Now for the next 15 minutes or so, I'm going to be focusing upon our current issues with regard to infrastructure. Infrastructure in 2020, of course, this is very much in the news in the United States this summer of 2021 as the infrastructure bill put before Congress. So I'll touch a little bit upon that bill, but also beyond that. Now, I want to reiterate what I talked about before when thinking about infrastructure, whether it's 100 years ago or now, the four basic themes that come up again and again and again with regard to any form of infrastructure that the United States undertakes. That first one being the distinction between legacy infrastructure, in other words, infrastructure that exists currently but needs upkeep or upgrade or maintenance or otherwise, and then what I referred to as new technology. Of course, the new technology of 100 years ago, very different than the new technology of the present. The second theme that I talked about earlier, and that's the theme of private sector monies and effort and investment, and thus the role of the consumer, the American consumer, vis-a-vis infrastructure, underwriting it and paying for it, versus public monies invested in infrastructure, but also the issue of public oversight, regulation or otherwise. And it's that dynamic tension that's there between the public and the private sector. The third I mentioned, and that's the rural-urban difference. Again and again, the impact of infrastructure or the cost of infrastructure, or the access to infrastructure, it will vary depending upon where one lives, rural areas versus urban areas. And then the fourth theme that I focused upon, and that's the impact that international affairs has upon infrastructure investment. Now, those international affairs can mean warfare. Warfare sometimes has a silver lining. I don't want to say it's good, but has a silver lining of creating investment in infrastructure or discovery of new means and uses of infrastructure to the benefit. So airplanes, for example, coming out of World War I became more of a viable transportation infrastructure idea, as I mentioned in the earlier one, in 1920s after World War I. So those four themes, again, I'm going to touch upon. Also, as we look at the 2020s, I'm going to look at those same three categories of infrastructure investment. The first one being transportation infrastructure, the second being communication, and then the third being the issue of electrification. So with that in mind, thinking about where we are right now in the 2020s and what's going on with American infrastructure. Now, as you saw in how this is being built, how it was advertised to you, the Active Minds programming talking about from roads to bridges, I would reterm it and instead say from roads to bridges and beyond. And to be certain, though, roads and bridges are absolutely core to the issue, the first issue, and that is transportation infrastructure in the present day. And that has to do with, of course, the infrastructure bill that's being debated by Congress and undertaken, perhaps, but it also goes beyond that. So roads and bridges are important, as we well know, and the need to maintain and invest and upgrade American roads and bridges has been made readily apparent time and time again. The image that you see here, perhaps one of the most devastating ones. This Interstate 35 collapse over the Mississippi River in the Twin Cities in 2007 became a symbol, first of all, a terrible event, but also a symbol of the lack of investment and maintenance in the American infrastructure system. So this is a legacy system, of course, albeit a legacy system that was new and shiny in the 1950s, that being the US interstate highway system that, as I mentioned before, would later replace Interstate 66, which was just coming out in the 1920s. But again, it's still a legacy system, but one that needs maintenance. Now, I mentioned those themes. So when we think about legacy and the maintenance and the upgrading of them when necessary, newer bridges and otherwise, in dealing with the ravages of time. But I would emphasize at this point, I talked about those four themes, but I want to add a new theme that is in front of us again and again and again in the 2020s, and that's the theme of climate change. Now, this is not just about roads and bridges, but we here in Colorado know very well that climate change is having an impact upon our climate, and also at the same time, as a result of that, an impact upon infrastructure built in the past. What you see here is just a few days ago or a couple of weeks ago, and this is the closing of Interstate 70 at Glenwood Springs as a result of unprecedented rains and mudslides that forced again and again, and now for a lengthy period of time, the closing of Interstate 70. So my point here in showing this image is to bring forward that fifth theme that is now affecting all matters are almost all matters of infrastructure investment. And that is infrastructure, especially that which was built in the past, was not built to be prepared for changes, radical changes that have already taken place in the climate, whether that's floods or fires or otherwise. So now upgrading and maintaining infrastructure, whether it's roads or bridges or otherwise, is also having to take into mind the changes in climate. Now, also, when we think about legacy infrastructure investments in 2020, we're talking about other things. So it's not just roads and bridges, it's also airports. Now, remember, airports were cutting edge. They were what was then called the Denver Municipal Airport that I showed you before, later renamed Stapleton Airport, but then closed subsequently. But that was referred to as, quote, Stapleton's folly. It was perceived as a plaything of the rich back in the 1920s, early 1930s. No more. Airports and the maintenance of airports and the upgrading of airports is an imperative for infrastructure in the 21st century. And American airports are having to play catch up with international airports, far more cutting edge. Additionally, let's not lose sight of the fact that we still ship things significantly. So the maintenance and upgrading, especially for ever and ever larger shipping containers, the upgrading of American port systems, another important infrastructure investment. Now, keep in mind that it is not always public money that's going to be paying for that. So sometimes it's private investment, sometimes it's citywide investment. So it's not just federal monies, but it's very important to keep in mind that the transportation infrastructure is not just about the roads and bridges, it goes beyond that. And then, of course, there's new technology. Well, what's new in transportation? Well, I would suggest the recent events of multi-billionaires launching themselves into space, indicative of space travel being no longer the ambit solely and singularly of the American federal government and NASA. So the privatization of space exploration or space travel may turn out to be what in the past was referred to as nothing more than a plaything of the rich. But who knows, it may provide access to new technologies, new opportunities. And so space travel may well be the infrastructure perceived as a folly in the present, but may well show opportunities in the future. Who knows, 100 years from now, perhaps we'll look again. I'd also note one other very important thing in thinking about transportation infrastructure in 2020, and that is international competition coming from China in particular. And this is the story worthy of its own full presentation, but that story is one focused upon what's called the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative. And what you see here, the nations that are colored here are nations that have accepted Chinese investments. China is not giving this money away, but is loaning this money for the building of infrastructure projects. That's everything from roads and bridges to railroads, to airports, to ports, to pipelines, another very important infrastructure project. My point here is that what once was assumed as a global domination of the means of access to trade beyond the United States can now no longer be assumed. That China is building the roads and the railroads and the airports and the ports of the 21st century in other nations, and the United States is going to be in the position of seeing how it can play into and compete with that new infrastructure internationally. So that theme again coming up. And let's talk a little bit about communication. Now, legacy communication continues forward. We have phones just as we did 100 years ago, albeit different kinds of phones. We're talking about cell phones more often than not. We also have radio. Mainly radio has stuck around. We still listen to radio, might be internet radio. I'll get to the internet in just a moment, but radio when we're in our cars or otherwise. So the legacy infrastructure of communication is still there. We still use it, although it's largely moved over towards the private sector. So you don't, the Bell system that I talked about before having been broken up, now very much privatized, and the access to communication is one wherein individuals in the United States are finding that by way of private enterprise and their relationship with different providers, whether it's AT&T or otherwise. Now, those legacy, those legacy communication infrastructure systems do have to be maintained, but it is largely private and upgraded, private enterprise by way of consumer support that is doing that, moving from 4G to 5G and things of that sort. Now, all the same, the big issue in 2020 and 2021 into the 2020s when it comes to communication and infrastructure, and that's the issue of the internet and access to the internet by way of broadband technology. So you might recall when you went on the internet maybe 10, 15 years ago, you heard that sound of connecting by way of a modem. But now a movement into ever and ever more information being shared and used in communication by way of the internet and the necessity of broadband for that. And so when we think about that, a key component is where the access to broadband resides. And what you see here in this map is a map, by the way, prepared by the FCC that is reflective of the places where there is widespread broadband access, that's in blue, but there is also a lack of access, that's in green and especially in yellow. Now, this gets to that theme that I talked about earlier, and that's the issue of the urban-rural divide. That when you get into rural spaces where broadband access is one that has been provided by way of private enterprise, where you get your broadband, it's not always going into those rural spaces. And so a key component factor of the 21st century and communication is the issue of access to broadband, particularly in less marketable areas that are far more remote, far more expensive to reach. Now, here we have an analogy that I teed up in my last time talking about the 1920s, and that's the issue of electrification. I would suggest that what happened in the 1930s in rural electrification is what we are seeing happening now, a push towards rural broadband access. But I'd also add, given that broadband access is happening by way of private enterprise, there's also the issue of financial access. So it's not just rural spaces, it's also urban spaces and people with less capital and ability to afford broadband. Those two elements are central to communication and the story of the 21st century and communication and infrastructure. Last but not least, I want to emphasize the issue of electrification and the matter of infrastructure and the maintenance and upgrading of the American electrical grid. This is the story of electricity, no longer a unique thing as it was to an extent 100 years ago. Now it's a matter of taking the grid as it exists and has for 100 years, it's been built over time, and bringing it up to speed for the 21st century challenges and difficulties. And again, we have the issue of climate coming up. You might recall earlier in 2021, there was a devastating blackout in Texas. That Texas blackout caused by severe weather that plunged south. You see on the map in the lower left there, that deep frost, and the Texas grid was not prepared for that deep frost and thus significant power outages. So when we think about the electric grid and the maintenance of it, there are a few themes here. One, as I said before, climate change and upgrading the grid to be prepared for the extremes in weather that we're seeing, whether it's deep cold in Texas or wildfires in California. And by the way, some of those wildfires, not just caused by extreme drought, but caused by the electric grid, where the PG&E grid, in fact, triggered some of those wildfires. In addition to that, there are 21st century challenges, and that's the issue of cyber vulnerability, whether that's the bugs within the cyber system that maintain the grid. That was a blackout in 2003, or more significantly, and perhaps of great concern in the immediate, and that's the vulnerability of the American electrical grid to outside malfeasance, most notably potentials for Russian hacking. So the grid needs to be protected on multiple levels. One last thing I'll say relative to the electric grid in the 21st century and 2020s, and that is that as the grid is being prepared for, and the United States is addressing issues of climate change, most notably the issue of shifting from fossil fuels to renewable energy, the grid, which was designed based upon fossil fuel basis, if we and as the United States shifts towards renewable energy sources, the grid has to be prepared to shift with it. So, for example, you need more battery storage. So that might be one of the major stories of infrastructure of the 2020s and beyond. And that is not just how to get electricity from point A to point B, but from to store it in a place right now. Right now, the almost exclusive storage of American electricity happens by way of reservoirs that are released to create hydroelectric power. That's the story of the past. The story of the present and future is creating a grid that is ready for the sourcing of energy that is renewable rather than fossil fuels. So with that, I want to finish things up talking about 2020. It has just been a terrific opportunity for me to be able to share with you our thoughts at Active Minds, focusing upon infrastructure in the past and infrastructure in the present and future. So looking forward to being with you and opening things up for questions. Thanks, everybody.
Well, thank you for those interesting presentations today, John. Great having you here today. Now I'd like to introduce our next segment. This is a special performance from Colorado's own Central City Opera. So joining us today is world-renowned mezzo-soprano Megan Marino and pianist and conductor Sarah Parkinson. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the Central City Opera.
Hello, seniors. I'm Emily Murdoch, Director of Education for Central City Opera. Thanks to you and to the Colorado Gerontological Society for allowing Central City Opera to share a performance in your annual Salute to Seniors. 2021 and 2020 have been unprecedented times, and we are so happy to share in your virtual event. Founded in 1932, Central City Opera, or CCO, is the fifth oldest professional opera company in the country and is renowned for its exquisite world-class productions, competitive and robust young artist training program, and creative education and community engagement activities. The Summer Festival takes place at 8,500 feet above sea level in the Colorado mountain town of Central City, only 35 miles west of Denver, where the company owns and maintains 29 Victorian-era properties, including the intimate 550-seat Jewel Box Opera House built in 1878. The 2021 CCO Summer Festival is an all-outdoors festival taking place at Hudson Gardens and Event Center in Littleton and the Opera House Garden in Central City. CCO's year-round education and touring programs connect around 40,000 students, families, and seniors annually with performances, workshops, residencies, and virtual programming throughout Colorado for everyone from young students to lifelong learners. We travel to venues including schools, churches, retirement homes, and community centers across the state and online in order to spread the love of opera and classical music. My colleague, Education Coordinator Megozaki Graves, and I have so much fun bringing arts education and performances to the Colorado community. The virtual performance you'll enjoy today is by Central City Opera artists mezzo-soprano Megan Marino and pianist Sarah Parkinson. They will perform an aria from an 1866 French opera and a familiar pop song from a 1970s film. Megan decided to arrange these two pieces together. I'll tell you a little bit more about them now. American-Italian mezzo-soprano Megan Marino is a genre-adventurous, gifted actress with a strong, appealing voice graced by a rich lower register. Be it on or off stage, standard fare, forgotten gem, or a work in progress, she's driven by the glory of the art form, a deep yearning to tell meaningful stories, and pure, undiluted moxie. Her recent appearances include the Metropolitan Opera, the Paris National Opera, Lyric Opera of Chicago, San Francisco Opera, Santa Fe Opera, Central City Opera, Spoleto Festival USA, and the Caramore Music Festival. She has garnered awards from many foundations, including the George London Foundation and Marcello Giordani Foundation, among others. Megan holds degrees in vocal performance from the University of Southern Maine and University of Colorado at Boulder. She is an active board member of her union, practices Ashtanga yoga, enjoys cooking, baking bread, and crocheting, and is an animal lover. You can find out where Megan is performing next by visiting her website at meganmarino.com. Sarah Parkinson enjoys a varied career as a pianist, conductor, and arts administrator. She performs regularly with the Colorado Ballet Orchestra and members of the Colorado Symphony, and is a founding member of Nuevo Tango Ensemble Grande Orquesta Navarre. She made her operatic conducting debut with Mozart's Così fan tutte for Boulder Opera, and she has been music director at St. Aidan's Episcopal Church in Boulder since 2015. Sarah has been a member of the Central City Opera Touring Artists since 2012 and is executive director at the Boulder Phil since May 2021. She holds degrees in piano performance from the University of Iowa, New England Conservatory, and a Doctor of Musical Arts in Collaborative Piano from CU Boulder. And now here's a little bit more about the musical pieces you're about to hear. Connais-tu le pays, or Do You Know the Land, is an aria or song from the opera Mignon, written in 1866 by composer Ambroise Thomas, with an original French libretto or text by Jules Barbier and Michel Carré. Thomas is best known for his operas Mignon and Hamlet, but neither are frequently produced in America today. The aria's text is based upon the first two stanzas of Mignon's Gesang, or Mignon's Song, written in 1784 by German poet Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, and later published in his second novel, Wilhelm Meister's Apprenticeship. Goethe's Mignon inspired poets and composers alike, with many poems written after the original and over a dozen musical settings representing the German, French, and Russian languages and national musical styles. Pure Imagination was written for the film Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory in 1971 by composer-lyricist Leslie Bricusse and songwriter Anthony Newley. Bricusse is best known for his musicals Stop the World, I Want to Get Off, and Victor Victoria. Newley was co-writer of Goldfinger, the title song from the 1964 James Bond film. First sung by Gene Wilder, this song is an established jazz standard and a popular cover, recorded by a broad range of artists from Maroon 5, Primus, to Fiona Apple, to Josh Groban. And now, please enjoy Megan Marino and Sarah Parkinson's performance. Thank you.
Sous
What a great group. Now it's time for our last visit to that resources fair. You've got about 15 minutes now until we meet back here on the main stage. As a reminder, all you need to do is push that expo button that's on the left-hand side bar there, and you can scroll through the whole list, clicking on the ones that you like. You can watch the videos, you can chat with the exhibitors live, visit websites, and of course, you can click on that send me more info if you'd like to learn more. And if you're watching on Facebook, remember, I urge you to come join us. You can follow the link in the description. You can get logged on to that virtual conference platform, just one click away. Now, please enjoy the fair, and we'll meet back here in 15 minutes. We're going to close out the event today with a special guest. We have Hazel Miller and the Collective.
Feels like just last night I was holding you tight. Whenever we connect, it's a primal cause and effect. We start where we left off, like we never get enough. Every time I see you, it's like we've never been apart, baby, no. Every time I'm with you, we talk heart to heart, baby, heart to heart. Your voice brings back memories. You got my poor heart skipping beats. I want you right here with me, but I'm content with my fantasy. Can't forget your sweet touch. When I'm with you, I need it so much. Start where we left off, like we never get enough. Every time I see you, it's like we've never been apart, baby, no, no. Every time I'm with you, we talk heart to heart. I don't want to analyze us. Everybody, they wanna patronize us. Some things in life are meant to be, like this attraction between you and me. Baby, every time I see you, every time I'm with you, every time I see you, it's like we've never been apart, oh, baby, no. Every time I'm with you, we talk heart to heart. Can we talk heart, baby, heart to heart. Can we talk? Can we talk heart to heart? Can we talk? Can we talk heart to heart? Can we talk? Can we talk heart to heart? Can we talk? Can we talk heart to yeah? Can we talk? Can we talk heart to heart? Yeah. Come on, come on, come on, come on. light down deep in the valley. Nothing more than a candle flame stands in constant danger of being lost to the winds of change. Every time we reach out to our brother, adds a little fuel to the fire. Keep it burning hot for each other, hold it up higher and higher. The more you give, the more you get. Everybody knows it's true. There is a wonderful spark in everyone's heart. Don't be afraid, light your flame, let your love shine through. Shine a light in everything you say and do. Shine a light, everybody's gonna wanna follow you, yeah. Tell us who our enemy's gonna be. All we're doing here is play and follow the leader. Let me follow someone who's a real true seeker. You wanna show me the way, show me that you know the way. The more you give, the more you get. Everybody knows it's true. Wonderful spark in everyone's heart. Don't be afraid, you got to light your flame and let your love shine through. Shine a light in everything you say and do. Shine a light, everybody gonna wanna follow you. Shine a light in everything you say and do. Shine a light, 'cause everybody gonna wanna follow you. Shine a light in everything you say and do. Shine a light, everybody's gonna wanna follow you. How do we keep on going when life is so serene? Can't even go outside to beg, borrow, or steal. Ain't got lots of money, and now my rent is due. Don't know if I'm gonna make it without my thoughts of you. Wanna be with you forever, so stay out of touch right now. now, 'cause I can't take much more. Worth the dollar, I gotta go raise some change. Questions make me holler. I wanna be with you again. Just wanna be with you forever. So stay in touch right now. We all wanna be together. So stay in touch right now. Stay in touch right now. Stay in touch right now. This next song is written by Rich Lamb. Ooh, so crystal clear. Desert nights, the shadows near. Sad, still warm from day. Cast a mood, that's magic. Then the cactus blooms, the young are see through the night swoon. But tonight the spell is right for the dance. On the stars, can't see tonight, iguana dance. The moon was right. light my candle for the 7 desires. Inside my heart was breaking, burning like a fire. The moment I met you, 7 wishes finally met, cast a spell on me, and I had to have your love. I'm no longer satisfied with the simple desire. Wish for wealth and wisdom, money, power, luck, and fame. But to live without your love, my baby, baby, now I knew I'd never be happy with just those things. I'm gonna fall down on my knees and pray that you will come to me. I'm no longer satisfied with the simple desire. Oh no. 7 desires. Health and wealth and wisdom, have a luck, no life and love. 7 desires. Health and wealth and wisdom, have a luck, no life and love. For the pleasures of this world were freely given to me. My only sacrifice would be now that our love could never, never be. In a heartbeat I would race into your arms, forsake this world and all of its charms. I'm no longer satisfied with the simple desire, ready to cast to the fire. Simple desire. No, 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 no. 7 desires. Health and wealth and wisdom, have a luck, no life and love. 7 desires. Health and wealth and wisdom, have a luck, no life and love. 7 desires. Health and wealth and wisdom, have a luck, no life and love. 7
so glad you were able to join us for this virtual salute. We've enjoyed some great speakers today. We had great live entertainment and some wonderful exhibitor booths for you to enjoy. As a reminder, you can continue to check out those booths until 5 o'clock today. That's 5 p.m. Mountain Time. The live elements of the salute now have concluded, though. For the moment, we've all been waiting for now. We have one special attendee today who's going to be receiving that $100 Amazon gift card. You have pretty good odds here to win this one. So before we announce today's winner, we want to thank you and thank all our speakers, our entertainers, our great exhibitors today, our media sponsors, and the title sponsor for making this virtual event possible. We want to especially thank Cigna, that's our title sponsor, and Pharma for their supportive sponsorship. And lastly, we want to thank you for attending today, for joining in, making this virtual salute one to remember. We appreciate you. All right, let's get to it. I'm happy to announce today's winner it's Joan Hernandez. So Joanne, congratulations. Please look at your email on how you can claim your prize today. All right, I have one last exciting announcement for you. I'm happy to say that CGS has booked this convention center for June 16th and 17th of 2022 for a return to an in-person salute to seniors. That'll be nice. So we hope to see everyone there next June 2022. Thank you, everyone, for a wonderful event these past couple of days. Stay healthy, stay safe, have a wonderful weekend. Feel free to continue browsing those exhibit booths. Again, they're open until 5 this evening. I'm Mitch Jelniker, and on behalf of the Colorado Gerontological Society, salute to all of you.